So to start, we're very lucky to have again Kim Boswell as our key speaker today. Probably some of you would know Kim from a previous webinar about recruiting volunteers and inspiring young people. But for the ones that don't know Kim, so Kim's has over 20 years experience in the not-for-profit sector as a community engagement expert. She's a facilitator, trainer and coach. And she is the founder of the Forever Agenda, where she supports environmental not-for-profits and community groups to increase their income, reach, and impact. And I'll head over to Kim. Hi, Kim.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and good afternoon to those joining us over in WA. Anna, did you want to unshare your screen, please? Beautiful. Oh, there's everyone. I love coming into webinars and seeing all of these familiar faces and familiar names. Barbara Jacob, I don't think I've seen you in years. It's so great to see your face. And I think I saw Ian Rainbow's name pop up and a whole bunch of people. So hello, friends. I know that means something else here in Victoria, doesn't it? I have to say hello, friends and Landcarers and people who are friends and Landcarers, because I'm sure plenty of us are doing both. I am going to jump in and share my screen. Here we go. Beautiful. So I am coming to you today from the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Bunurong Boonwurrung, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and those emerging through the communities at such a critical time to take on leadership roles. Let's get going. So I just thought I'd take a moment to introduce myself. For those of you I haven't met before, I'm the founder of the Forever Agenda and Community Leaders Academy. And as Anna said, I support community groups and small to medium not-for-profits. But Landcare and environmental space is my jam. I first came to Landcare back in 2009 in a Landcare facilitator role. And since then, I've had the absolute privilege of being a volunteer, a committee member, a president, a consultant, and I've just ticked over 100 strategic plans facilitated for Landcare and environmental groups and networks. So I draw on that experience to put this presentation together for you today, but I'm also aware that you all have incredible experience out there from being on the ground, from being in committees, and from recruiting volunteers and doing your own version of succession planning. So as Anna said, please share that experience. The chat is such a rich space I've found in these webinars we've been doing. So keep your eyes on the chat and yeah, feel free to pop in comments and questions. I thought we'd kick off by talking a little bit about where our understanding of succession planning comes from, because when Anna and I first started talking about this session, I knew that succession planning got talked about a lot in Landcare circles and in our environmental groups, but we didn't feel like we were doing a lot of it. And so succession planning, we're often talking about it in the context of business and corporations, right? Big business spend a lot of energy, a lot of expense on succession planning, usually for their management. And they have huge budgets, right? Which is usually delivered by HR departments and sometimes multiple roles working in the space. So they have a lot of resources pumping into it. And then the other place that's common for us as Landcarers is out on the farms. So the children are returning to the farm, and that process of handing over the family farm business onto the next generation. And there's often resources put towards that. And, you know, sometimes we do it well, sometimes not so well, but the context is quite different to that of our small volunteer community groups. And so without all of that resources and budget and money, what's super important is that we make it easy. And that's what we're going to look at tonight in this presentation, is how do we take succession planning and make it super easy? And I'm going to do that for you in 3 parts. The first is bringing the barriers into the light. So understanding why it is that we're not succession planning, what are those barriers in our way, and being able to identify when they're at play in our groups and our networks. Because once we can see that they're happening, then we can adjust things to have them not make such a big impact. Then we're going to look at creating a culture of succession. So because we don't have a whole bunch of resources and time, we want to look at what are those key principles that make succession planning a natural part of our group's culture and just kind of the way things that are done. Sometimes it can be the smallest of tweaks that we make that makes the biggest of difference in terms of the succession that's happening. And then finally, because we all like tools, we're going to build a bit of a toolbox so that you've got things that you can utilize, have at your disposal to make succession, simple and easy. Sound good? All right. Ooh. So let's kick off with barriers. I am going to say that maybe some of these are going to be controversial. Some of these you might relate to, others you may not. So the first barrier to succession planning is limited resources. No surprises here, right? So time, money, staff. Without an abundance of all of this, it can make it really difficult for us to prioritize and invest in succession planning efforts. Number 2 is resistance to change. So succession planning can be perceived as a threat to existing leadership or a disruption to the organization's culture and operations. We are all motivated by different things. So within your committee of leadership, you might have someone who's motivated by building their resume, and that's why they're on committee. You might have someone who's motivated by making new friends, and they really like the social environment of the Landcare committee. You might have someone who had a really big managerial role in their career, and they enjoy the sense of power that comes from being on a committee, and they want to give back to their community, and they have real skills in this area. So there's a whole different realm of kind of motivations happening from a whole bunch of different members that come together to form a committee. And sometimes those motivations can also bump into each other a bit. Change is hard, guys. Like, we know that change is hard, whether it's you're retiring from a job and your sense of purpose is shifting, or, if the kids have grown up and they're leaving home and your sense of purpose starts to shift. Change can be really difficult. And so sometimes we have a resistance to change within the things that we've become used to. And what I want to say about this, if you do identify with this, or if you've seen this before, is that it's totally normal and it's totally okay. And just having an awareness of maybe that's what we're feeling can help bring good progress in terms of succession to the group. So sometimes it's a little bit of a self-awareness journey as well. When it comes to disruption to the organization's culture and operations, look, the reality is that when we bring new committee members into our groups, things are going to change. New people come with new interests, new ideas, and sometimes it shakes up the status quo a bit. And so sometimes we can feel a bit of resistance to this, especially if, you have a great cohesive committee, you're a really tight bunch of friends, risking that can feel a bit daunting. And so it's all totally okay. It's all totally normal. And there's nothing to say that you have to change either. So if your committee is functioning great and you're all doing really well and you're all getting along really well and you've made great progress, there's nothing to say that you do have to go through that change. So it's all totally okay. Number 3 is limited candidate pool. We all know this, right? Especially out in smaller communities and regional areas, identifying and attracting volunteers at all can be challenging, let alone candidates to fill those key positions. It can be a real challenge. Another barrier is the focus solely on young people. Sometimes in Landcare and in other community groups, we can get quite obsessed with wanting to hand the baton on to younger people. And young people, as we heard back in the volunteer recruitment workshop from Annette and Amy, they have all kinds of barriers to their participation. Time, they're trying to buy houses or build careers. They have really tight schedules. And so there's all kinds of barriers there, but we feel like, we really want to hand that baton on to the younger generation. And it's great, but also our older generation have so much to give as well. And I know that sometimes on our committees, we might find that, everyone's in their 80s or 90s, like the only way is down. But, if we look around and we see like our retirees have so much value. They've had these incredible lives full of different experiences. They have so much knowledge to pass on. And so sometimes in our obsession with bringing on young people and handing that baton on to the next generation, we forget to look around at the people who are there ready to step up. Number 5 is limited diversity. So many community groups lack diversity in leadership and the volunteer base, which can limit the pool of potential candidates and make it challenging to achieve a more representative and inclusive organisation. And what I've seen happen a few times is when a bit of intentional effort is put into increasing diversity in committees and in volunteer groups, that it kind of cracks open this whole new pool of volunteers, because once you start to get a bit of diversity in, that attracts more diversity. So it actually makes your potential candidate pool a lot bigger. Number 6 is short-term focus. So look, because of the very nature of what we do, we're often more focused on just meeting the immediate needs in front of us and the immediate goals rather than long-term planning and strategy. What I would say is that in Landcare, we've gotten quite good at long-term planning. We do a lot of strategic planning now. There's a lot of landscape scale and long-term planning happening. But, still, we are often small community-based groups. And if something's not sitting in that kind of urgent, important space, it's hard to prioritize it because we're just trying to put one foot in front of the other half the time. And number 7 is roles and responsibilities. So without clearly defined roles, it can be challenging for people to understand what is actually required of them. And on the flip side of that, when we have really clearly defined roles and don't have flexibility around those tasks and task allocation, we can actually limit ourselves and fail to give people a way to just dip their toe in, because taking on a big role is a big commitment and it can be quite daunting. But if we can give people tasters, that can be a bit more achievable and appealing to potential volunteers. And I guess one of the biggest barriers of all is that succession planning is actually a process of change that happens over time. And so it's not this thing that's sitting on our agenda or on our to-do list that we can tick off and it's done. It tends to be something that gets pushed to the side and pushed to the side. Mañana, por la mañana, for any of the Spanish speakers out there, which means like, tomorrow, maybe the next day, maybe the next day. Because if it's not urgent right now, we're sort of parking it and thinking we'll get to it. And as we know, time passes on, and suddenly we find we've done nothing in this space. But we can keep it easy. And as I said, sometimes it's not about having it as another thing on our to-do list, but about tweaking a few bits and pieces here and there to make succession more realistic. So let's have a look at some of those basic principles. The first one is simplify and deformalize to create an environment of inclusion. Now, no one touched on this better than our case studies in the past two LVI webinars in the series. So in the most recent one, Understanding Committee Roles and Responsibilities, we had the fabulous Gillian Stanton from South Gippsland Landcare Network, and she talked about simplifying meeting processes. So she told an amazing story about how they were doing, motions and seconding motions, and it wasn't in the rules. And so Gillian just decided to simplify it. And she said, well, what needs to happen? We need to make decisions. And so we talk about what the decision is that needs to be made. We make the decision, and then we minute the decision. And it's as simple as that. We also had Annette and Amy talk about how that formal sort of meeting environment can be a bit of a deterrent. Annette and Amy were from Intrepid Landcare, and they talked specifically around inspiring young people to come into groups. And that was one thing that they'd really done away with, was the monthly meeting, because they just wanted to be out on the ground getting stuff done. And so simplifying those meeting processes and the frequency of meeting can be one way to become more inclusive. Clive told an amazing story. Clive is from Project Platypus. And hi to if any of these folks are in the room, and thank you so much for these incredible contributions. I think we all, but especially me, I got so much out of listening to those case studies. And Clive told this really great story about how he had worked in a corporate environment, and he was really used to, hardy, robust conflict in meetings. And when he found himself in the chair role, he realized that not everybody had that same level of comfort with, debating and conflict. And so he got really intentional about creating space for everyone to have a say, and how to change the meeting processes to make sure there was real inclusion in the room, and that he could, create a really great dynamic amongst the participants. And so I highly recommend, if you're interested in any of those stories, that you can go back and watch those really great webinars. And I know they're up on the LVI website. There's links to the YouTube videos. The next principle is tasks over roles. So I touched on this briefly before, but when we give people a taster through tasks, it's a bit less overwhelming than stepping into a whole role. And a role can be accountable for a series of tasks that sit within it without actually needing to be responsible for completing the actual task. So a secretary does not need to write the minutes. a secretary needs to be able to sign off that the minutes are a true and accurate account of what has happened at the meeting. But they don't have to be the one to actually write the minutes. And sometimes minute taking is a really big barrier to getting people into secretary roles. And so if that's the case, we can look at other ways that we can get minutes done. And then maybe we have more candidates for a secretary role. There's some pretty cool stuff happening in the AI space. And for my farming friends, I am not talking artificial insemination, AI as in artificial intelligence. So there's a big buzz about artificial intelligence at the moment. And one of the cool things that's starting to emerge with the technology is some stuff around systems that can record your meetings, start to learn whose voice is who. They take the recording of the meeting, they turn it into a whole transcript, and then they summarize it up into minutes and action points. And so the secretary then just goes in, corrects it, moves stuff around, simplifies it, minutes done. Amazing. I don't know. Still a bit controversial in some spaces, but like technology can be our friend for this stuff as well. And one thing that Anna was really clear on in that roles and responsibilities webinar is that there is a lot of flexibility here, and you can just check your constitution for any clarity that you need around what roles and how they can be changed and moved. So the next principle is creating space. When we talk about succession, it can kind of conjure up these images of like dragging people into the roles and that it's a really hard thing to do. But what if we thought about it in a new way? What if it was more about creating space and then seeing what bubbled up to fill that space? So creating space at a meeting level. And one way to do this is in the way that Clive spoke about, the way that we facilitate or chair meetings, ensuring that there's space for everyone to have a voice. Also leaving space in the agenda for other things to pop up. We can tend to really jam-pack our agendas and run over time, and we're all guilty of it. But what if we really pared it all back and left space in those agendas so new voices could come up with new ideas, also new things could emerge? Creating space at a program level. So as an organisation, are we open to people coming along with new ideas? Can we make space for those new ideas to happen? Because if people come in with like project or program ideas, this is a really amazing training ground for leadership. And when it's instigated by themselves, there's a real motivation there that you can harness for your group. What about creating space at the AGM? Now, I know we often think that we know exactly how the AGM is going to pan out because we've obviously done our research and spoken to people beforehand. But sometimes there's people in the room that we don't necessarily know about because our AGMs are usually open to the public. And I've seen this a few times before where, you might have the person in a leadership role, maybe it's your president, secretary, or a treasurer, and they've said time and time again they're going to stand down. And then when there's a call for nominations and there's a bit of space, there's a bit like, oh, all right, I'll do it again. And they reluctantly raise their hand and step back in the role. And this is not great for them, right? Because when our people feel like it's time to step down, We need to create space that they can step down, but we need them to step down so that other people can step up. And sometimes we don't leave quite enough room or space for those people to step into. And sometimes we need to let go of control a bit, which can be super challenging, right? Because we're used to having control, we're used to knowing what's going on. But sometimes to allow for succession to happen, we need to create a little more space. Approach recruitment in a planned and targeted way. Recruitment is a massive part of succession planning. We're not going to go into it in detail because we had the recruitment webinar, but it's simply about understanding what you need, being open to something else that comes along, figuring out who might be the type of people who would do a role like this, and having one-on-one conversations. This applies to bringing people in from the outside, but also looking internally within your existing membership and your existing volunteer base. Taking a proactive approach with training and development. So delegate and share those tasks even before you need to. Don't wait until you're overloaded to start sharing the load. People learn through exposure. And so allowing people to step up and take on a little bit of responsibility, a little bit of something interesting can go a long way to bringing them into a leadership fold over time. Humans have this funny thing that we do where we like to hold on to knowledge. It's really not uncommon. And we even have this saying of like, knowledge is power. And we hang on to knowledge and we don't want to share it because there's power in that. But knowledge isn't power, right? The power lies in the action. And so while we hold and we hoard this knowledge, we're not empowering people around us and we're not allowing others to step up and take action in our place. Sharing training opportunities. So I have a great story around this. I got a beautiful email this week from Karen Garth, who is she's the secretary of Healesville Environment Watch and the president of Yarra Ranges Landcare. And she sent an email around to her committee and her membership in regards to this webinar tonight. And she said, that I really think one of us should be at this webinar. I went to the last one on recruitment, so just wondering if anyone wants to go along and take some notes about what value we can pull from this webinar for our group. And it's just so beautiful to allow those opportunities for other people and to let other people know what's going on, because we are so fortunate excuse me, in this Landcare space and in all of our environmental volunteer groups where we have a lot of entities supporting us from the state government, LVI, Landcare Australia. There's always a lot of opportunities going on. So looking at sharing those training opportunities around, but also understanding what interests our people. What do they want to learn and how can we be a conduit for them to learn those things they want to learn or into networks that can be valuable for them? And that's a big part of being on committee, isn't it? It's like connecting the dots and creating the bridges between this entity and these people. And so the more we can look at training and development as being something that is shared amongst the membership and amongst the volunteer pool, the more we are actually creating a bit of a leadership pipeline that can come along. So on a similar note, an engaged membership is a two-way conversation. So talking about succession, talking about roles, talking about the work or the tasks that get done within the group regularly, just brings it all out into the open and makes it a bit normalized. I always say survey the membership regularly. I know this is super controversial because we can all feel a bit like we're all surveyed out, like, oh, not another survey. But I actually challenge this sentiment because sometimes we hear a few people say not another survey and we just decide, oh, not another survey. But people don't mind doing surveys. People want to have their voice in. This is a really amazing way to get collaborative ideas together. And so, yeah, sure, do short surveys of, 5 questions, and longer surveys maybe once a year. But surveying is also the informal stuff that happens, right? It's those informal conversations that you're having. And it's totally okay to note things down so you don't forget. But it's a process, that surveying, that kind of happens throughout any event that we have, where you're meeting people and you're finding out about people and you're finding out what interests them and what ideas they have and what their needs are and what their motivations are for being in the group. And if you as a committee can have your finger on that pulse and understand the needs and the motivations of your membership and your communities, you are 10 steps ahead of everyone else. This is why the people make really great presidents and leadership roles, because they tend to know all of these different people in the community and what's going on for them. And the other thing is invite people into committee meetings, like fly open the doors, let people in. They don't need to be these closed events. There is unlikely to be anything in your rules that says you have to have a closed committee meeting. People can attend without having a vote. People can contribute. People can come and see what it's all about. Because committee meetings can get really big reputations. People can have really horrible experiences. And when they think about joining your committee, that's the experience they're thinking about. So if we fling open the doors and go, well, this is the experience of being on our committee, then we're showing them real time what we're recruiting them in for, or what they have the opportunity to join. And if you're cringing right now and thinking, oh my goodness, what is she talking about? We do not want anyone to come in and see what happens in our committee meetings, then I think it's time to review your committee meetings, because if they're not enjoyable for you, they're probably not going to be enjoyable for anyone else coming in. So this is a big one. Consider the process of stepping down as much of that as that of someone stepping into a role. I am absolutely a fan of inducting new committee members. I think it's really important to give people an understanding of what they're signing up to, because, you do have legal responsibilities when you join a committee. And so making sure people, have that foundational understanding of what it means to govern a community group or to govern a not-for-profit organisation is really important. And then those kind of ABCs around your organisation, how your organisation works, things as simple as people's contact details, that really makes a big difference. I am a massive fan of making role turnover the norm and having it in your rules. I'm not talking committee turnover, so I'm not saying that people can't stay on committees long term. I'm saying role turnover is very healthy. And I understand that it's not always the case. In many, many community groups, we have people in executive positions who have been there for 5, 10, yes, 15, 20 years. It's not uncommon. And I pass absolutely no judgment. I want you to know that, because your unique situation is different for every single group and every single community. But generally speaking, it's not healthy for the group to have people sit in roles long term. And so if you can make role turnover your norm, in that, you know, maybe your president has been in the role for 2 or 3 years and your secretary has been in the role for 2 or 3 years, and they swap roles and just give another role a go. Maybe your president steps down and goes into a general committee role. Someone else steps into the president role, but they really love that president role, so they go back and do another 2-year term, and then they step down again. Like, it's totally okay, but that rotation keeps it healthy and fresh. Legacy is something that I'm a massive fan of. So we have a lot of really, really incredible volunteers sitting in our Landcare, our friends groups, our environmental groups, all over this state and indeed all over this country. And we do things like, you know, awards ceremonies. There's lots of great stuff like that for Landcare, which is fantastic, but it doesn't actually work for everyone. So legacy is this sentiment of really tapping in to our internal recognition systems. You know, things like awards and articles in newspapers and all of that, that's external recognition. It's really great, but it doesn't tend to be long lasting. Tapping into our internal recognition through extracting the stories of our legacy is so powerful. And there's this thing, right, that happens, particularly in the environmental movement, where apathy can set in. And apathy left unchecked will turn into burnout. So if you have situations in your committee where, you know, people are getting really over it and they're feeling really apathetic, legacy can be a really amazing tool to tap into, because it puts the focus back on not what others are not doing, but what am I doing? What have I achieved? Why am I here? Why do I love Landcare? What is it about this group of people that I enjoy being around? What are some of those stories of friendships? What is it that I love? And really, you know, you can do this for yourself, just starting to extract those stories and put the focus back on, you know, the amazing stuff and the achievements. It's so powerful. It's so powerful to bring that focus back on what is in your control. And this is really important tool for if you have people in leadership positions who are feeling a bit stuck. And, you know, every year they're like, I want to step down, but they feel like they can't. And they don't. And it can get really damaging after a time. So use that extraction of legacy as a tool to help people to really celebrate what they've achieved. I'm a massive fan of celebration and appreciation. Do it till the cows come home. Celebrate Jill's amazing lemon yogurt cake in the same way that you would celebrate the, you know, successful grant application and the person who put all of the time and effort into writing that grant application. Keep celebrating, keep appreciating. There is a real element of self-awareness in this process of stepping down, and like really asking ourselves the question and knowing when it's time to go. And sometimes helping our friends see when it's time to go as well. Sometimes we just need a bit of an outside perspective to tap us on the shoulder and let us know. And of course, respectful conversations always, because I know some of these things can feel a bit heated at times. So let's have a look at respectful conversations. So for those coming into leadership positions, and if you're here and you're from a committee that feels like you're always out there trying to recruit and you feel like you've asked everyone and you're the one that wants to get out, it might seem strange to you that I'm talking about those incoming. But what we know for sure is that there are people all around looking for amazing volunteer opportunities just like yours, and they're having the same feelings you are. So we heard this from Annette. The second top reason that young people had not joined Landcare groups was because they hadn't been asked. It didn't mean they didn't want to. It didn't mean the desire wasn't there. When I took on the role as the community engagement manager with a volunteer resource centre, and I'd been working as a Landcare facilitator, so for a long time prior to that, really focused on volunteer recruitment. And then I took on this role in a volunteer resource centre, and suddenly there were 50 people walking through the front doors every single week saying, we want to volunteer. Where are all the people looking for volunteers? And so they're there on the other side. So to the people coming in, I would say, what is your pitch? What is your pitch to the leadership and to the committees? What is it that they need? And how can you be of service? And lead with that. This applies to people coming in from the outside, but it also applies to people from within the committee who are starting to think, oh, yeah, when Max steps down, I really would like to try my hand at being the president. And they're out there too, right? But unless these respectful conversations are happening, we don't necessarily know it because, you know, Max has been in the role for 5 years. He's very comfortable. He's very set in his ways with how he does things. And it can be super intimidating to, you know, even broach the subject of the fact that I might like to be the president. So these conversations are really about finding out what it is that each other needs. If you're looking to step down from your role, what is it that you need to be comfortable and ready to take that step down? Maybe that is that you need a bit of recognition. Maybe it is that you need to know that everything won't fall apart. Maybe it is that you want to know that that soil health program is going to continue, even if you're not picking up all the pieces all the time. So being able to really look ahead and go, okay, when A, B, and C is done, that's when I'll feel comfortable to step down, and being explicit about that so that the group has something to work towards. Also thinking about how you can create space. And sometimes roles need to be vacant for people to be able to move into them, particularly if you've had long-standing executive members. And thinking about what do those new people coming in need? Do they need guidance? Do they need mentorship? What are their motivations for being here? Do they need, a database of information so they can find things? Because I can bet you what they do not need is 14 piles of paperwork being handed to them as they walk in the door. So setting yourself up for succession, and don't assume that you know what the others need. Unless you know for sure, and it's come from the other side, so the outgoing knows what the incoming needs, the incoming knows what the outgoing needs. Don't assume. Unless you know for sure, we've got no chance. And the other thing I would say in terms of respectful conversations is if it's in your head, it needs to be said. So many times we don't say the things we want to say, or we go into meeting after meeting trying to find the courage to say them. If we let this stuff bubble below the surface, it tends to come out in the wrong way. So your alarm bell of like, oh, this conversation should happen, is if it's swimming around your head, it needs to get said. So that brings us to, we've looked at the barriers, we've looked at the key principles of creating a culture of succession. I'm actually going to hand back to Anna now, and we're going to hear from John, and then I'll come back afterwards and run you through some quick, simple tools.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah, really enjoy that, because you might not know, but I'm also a treasurer of a small Landcare group, and yeah, that's me too. I can't find anyone to replace me. I might use some of these tips. And yeah, someone actually commented in the chat that you know, that she or he, I can't remember now. Sorry, he was stepping in as chair because it really didn't want to, but it's just scared that the group might fold if it doesn't happen. And I think there's not one straight answer to that. I guess it's all about using some of these strategies that Kim is talking about. But saying that, we have a very good speaker tonight. Well, it's a speaker, it's a case, we call him a case study, but it's really no different to any of you. John Forrester from the Werribee River Association. John has been a leading person, I believe, in the change that happened in the group. They went from a very, you know, just a normal group with their normal office bearers, and evolved now into a professional association. And John will be telling you this much better than I. But John is actually our second time speaker. He came and talked to us about fundraising in an earlier workshop, and he's a really hard worker, and yeah, it's just a great asset to his group. He's also, John, you're also the secretary, isn't it, of the River? Yep. So yeah, I'll head over to you, John. Thank you so much for coming tonight and sharing.
Thank you. Lovely to be here. Well done, Kim. Many of the things Kim said, of course, applied to us, and I hope everybody who looks at what I'm about to show you, 7 or 8 slides, will be very quick, I hope. But many of the things, Kim, that you've said will turn up in these slides. And I'll say a couple of things about our group. I'm going to share now. Let's see what we can do here. I'm trying to get the whole thing. How do I get the whole screen? Slideshow.
Yeah, that's it, slideshow.
Got it. Right. Thanks. Cheers. So I'll just talk about succession planning at our Werribee River Association. But first, we were challenged with the growth in Wyndham in Werribee. So when I started off in this group, we were a small group in a moderately small town, about, well, 30,000 people is not moderately small, I guess. But we struggled on for years with all the things Kim mentioned, you know, people in long-term roles and or vacancies and all that sort of a thing. And then the population started booming. So we looked at all the challenges in the Western state of the Werribee River and all that sort of a thing. And we came about this succession plan that happened. And my talk tonight's just a reflection on some of that. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land also in which we're speaking, in our case, the Bunurong, or from where I'm speaking tonight, but we share land with the Wadawurrung and the Wurundjeri a bit further upriver, of course, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So talking about surveys, this is what we did in November 2013. We asked our membership at the time, we had about 30 odd members, and we got about 13 to 15 answers to these questions. 7 or 8 from a meeting we were at. Then I chased up a few people over Christmas and we got answers to these sorts of things. And some of these answers I'll show you a bit later. So we tried a survey at the time. We also did a bit of a SWOT analysis and so on. So again, some of the things Kim said, we looked at ourselves and tried to get an open picture of ourselves and see where we were failing and working forward and so on. So here are some of our stuff. Yes, most of us at the time were over a certain age, and I'll just get rid of this thing on the side so I can see my screen. Just wondering, good, we missed that. So a lot of us were over 60 at the time, some well over. Our committee members, basically most over 40 years of age. Sorry, office bearers over 60 and the others over 40. We had at the time 8 family memberships of 2 adults only. So you can see that they were the older folks. And then we had 5 family memberships with young children, and they weren't, by and large, involved in a lot of our stuff, particularly the committee. And then we had 6 individual members who'd been around from the year dot. So, and there were 1 or 2 who were younger, and quite a few of those have moved on now. So that was at the time around 2013-14 when we began looking at this stuff. All right. Oh. And here's some more comments too from around those times. The minutes in September showed us the secretarial role was still vacant. That had been the case for quite a while. August earlier that year, no quorum present, so the record of the meeting was for advice only. So you can see the typical things happening. And down below, practice 2 was a bit of an analysis we did in time for the AGM. So practice 2, we noted that we suffered from a number of officer positions being left vacant, lost opportunities, missed fun, and more pressure on existing people, all the normal things that happen. So we looked at in our SWOT analysis, we looked what was around us. Again, here's another thing at the AGM. You can see President, myself, Vice President Glennis came on, well, she'd been around too as long as I had at the time. Secretary was vacant. Minutes Secretary, Robin, agreed to do that, and the Treasurer was vacant again, and committee members, no nominations. So we really hit rock bottom at that time. So these are just indicative of probably many groups. And I saw in the chat very similar things. At the time, we had around 33 financial members, and I've just mentioned the numbers there, about 33 adults and 7 kids. We're averaging meeting attendance 3.5. These are the committee meetings that we had at the time, and participation by members in other activity was generally low. And there's a sort of a value statement there. Participation rates would assist greater outcomes for the river, and an increase in numbers of members was desirable. So here's one of the survey questions answered. What don't you want River Association to do? And I picked this one to show you because I don't know whether you can see all these words. I won't dwell too long on them, but I will run through them. We asked them this because a couple of people were not really happy with the change, which is what Kim said earlier also, and it wasn't really, I don't think they were really unhappy with the thought of change, but it was just the challenge to the existing thing, the existing setup and so forth. What don't you want them to do? We don't want to stagnate, said someone. We don't want to become political. That meant take sides, and maybe I don't quite know really what it meant. I don't think it meant actually joining political parties or anything, but I think it meant becoming embroiled in local politics or even wider politics, a bit like climate change, I guess now might be the thing. They didn't want to move away from grassroots, that's the third thing, and hands-on projects, so they wanted to be local. They didn't want to miss the routine of monthly meetings, for example. In those days, we also had people come and speak and talk about, in fact, in our case at the time, we actually identified and had renamed officially the Eucalyptus barriana thalassina, which is a unique tree to our catchment. So that was really wonderful. One of our members did a lot of work on that, and it was really terrific. So people didn't want to miss that sort of information. We didn't want to ignore, we don't want to ignore press opportunities. We don't want to sit back and do nothing, again, another answer, and we don't want to duplicate stuff that other people did or other groups did. So they were just some of the good things that came out. We got those answers. And that was good. Now, at the time, some sort of context, I've written, this is my personal reflection on the time, and in fact, it's just about my last slide, Anna. So Landcare plans were around at the time, and I remember looking at the Toolan Vale Landcare just up the road, about 20k. They had a great plan at the time. I'm not sure if it was run actually by Port Phillip and Westport CMA, which was in existence at the time, and that's now been swallowed up by Melbourne Water. But the Landcare plan, I'm not sure whether it was a succession plan or just a sort of an organising plan, but it was really great and they were doing well. So that was happening out there in the wider world. And then I was watching some groups in our local area continue their success while others fell by the wayside. So some groups were slowing down, others were dying and had died. So, you know, I really got worried and I felt some sort of care for and responsibility for the River Association, as I'd known many of the people who started it off. I hadn't been around at the time, but I'd sort of felt responsibility. And since I'd been the driver, I didn't want to see us collapse or fade away. At the time, we approached 2 other groups to work with, as they were of similar purpose to us and had members the same age, faced the same challenges, and we even suggested amalgamation with a whole new name. But they didn't even respond to our call. So that was a bit disappointing. So we decided to point our own way to the future and wrote our first strategic plan. And so that's really what we decided and came to. And there were 4 or 5 or 6 others around, not necessarily all on the committee, but they all agreed that we should do these sort of things. And on the way, and I reflect now on a couple of comments there before about, again, Kim pointed out, celebrate, award, pat on the back, all these people who did things. And we saw that it was important to acknowledge the work and successes of former office bearers, and our recorded history and celebration of it remained high on our priority list. And in fact, in 23, 22, 21, 22, we actually launched a history, 40 years of the Werribee River Association with a grant from the Public Records Office. So it was really great. We've got a beautiful glossy book now, and it's also available online about our history. And it's just a typical story of a typical group, all the challenges and the policies that we submitted ideas to, and it's really great. And we're really pleased we did that. And now we are a group with a bit of diversity in it. And since that time, really, we've filled our membership positions. We've got a pretty active committee at the moment. In fact, we now call it a board, and we decided to go professional and got a few staff. And, you know, it suited Werribee because we're in this huge city now, which is what it is. It's 320 odd thousand, and it's going to be 500,000 people in another 10 years, I think. So it's one of the fastest growing areas, many of you will know, in Australia. So this change we went through suited us. It might not suit you, but there's still some good lessons from it in terms of looking at yourself with a hard nose and seeing what you can do. I don't have any answers for everybody else, but we found our answers. And that's about all, Anna. Thank you, and I'll return to you.
Thank you, John. As usual, that was great. And I love that you chose that what you don't want to do, because sometimes the way of making a decision is understanding what we don't want to do. And that gives us a good picture of where we want to head. And I really love that. And I thought, Kim, if you agree, we might take some questions now. I think we're good for time. So you okay with that?
Yeah, that's great.
So if anyone, I know that I've got a question here, but in the chat from Aisha to John, but you know, I'd love to see some brave people putting their hands up and unmuting themselves. But I understand if you're not feeling comfortable, also welcome to put questions in the chat to either Kim or John. And so Aisha's saying, can you tell us more about the process of professionalizing, John? Where did you get the money to pay salary?
Okay, so it was a hard road to get to the professional stage, but it took us a few years. In Melbourne, there's a few choices of funding. Melbourne Water helps us out. We've got and I'm going to try and think of the name now, a big grant we applied for with them, a real partnership thing called Living Waterways, Living Communities, I think is what it's called. I noticed maybe someone's on Melbourne Water here, so perhaps they can correct me on that. Got a couple of nods, which is great. So that's a great thing. So that actually employs our regeneration officer, basically, and she builds to the policies behind what's called the Werribee Biolink plan, which was created back in 2010. So we grabbed that great policy, that great book, that's literally a book, that was written in those days by Melbourne Water and a range of other water managers at the time, and nothing had been done with it. So we grabbed that and we said to Melbourne Water, look, we'd love to work on this, and they supported that. So that was one way. We then also spent about 4 years trying to get our DGR status, deductible gift recipient status, and we haven't really used it a lot. Now, Landcare Victoria also has that now, so maybe there's no need for a lot of groups to go and do that themselves. They could use Landcare Victoria to do that. But that was really good for us because we think it gave us a bit of another line of credibility when we did talk to a couple of philanthropics. But one of the philanthropics actually funded our business manager for a few years part-time, and we had to find other money to pay that person. But the Ross Trust, actually, that was, and they gave us some limited funds for a limited time, and that really kicked us off. And that person has done a great job now, and they found other sources of money. Somewhat controversially, we also work with a few land developers, and we take the point of view that we can't control world population growth, but what we can do is work with the land developers who are building houses in the area to try to make them the best houses they can be and the best gardens and so forth. And we do a lot of work. My role as the Werribee Riverkeeper, I spend a lot of time talking with government and planners and so forth in an attempt to change, to get better planning. And in fact, we were very successful on Waterways of the West, which is a follow-on from the Yarra River Act. So we work in those things. Other funds, look, it was just a hard row. We're still working on it. It's a constant challenge. I think I'll leave that question there, Anna.
So I'm calling this the Succession Ready Toolkit. I'm just a massive fan of toolkits, right? Like, as community organizations, we just need to have a bunch of stuff at our fingertips that we can call on and use. And it's never going to be a one-hit wonder. It's never going to work for every unique circumstance and combination of humans working together in different landscapes. But if we have a bunch of tools in the toolbox, or we have a bunch of tricks in our backpack that we can carry with us and pull out, it just makes it a lot easier when you've got those resources to call upon. I loved that John talked about strategic planning, because while I won't delve into that tonight, it is the #1 tool in your toolkit. By the very nature of our strategic planning, we are setting our visions, right? That is our true north. That is the picture of the perfect world that we are heading towards. Perfect. That's bad wording, isn't it? It's never going to be perfect, but we're painting that picture of the future world we want to see, and our action plans and everything is leading us on that road. Now, as part of your strategic planning process, you can address succession planning in that environment. So we know where we're heading. We know our mission, we know our values that are going to carry us there. We understand our priorities and our action plan, or the programs and actions that are going to lead us there. And so then it's the who, right? So who do we need to take us on that journey, and how do we find those people? But the first step is knowing where the gaps are and what those skills are that we're looking for. So succession planning, it's awesome when you've got space in your strategic planning to have it happen alongside or even following. Super simple SOPs, super simple SOPs, super simple SOPs, super simple SOPs. Say it 10 times really fast. Maybe it'll embed in your head, because if there is nothing else that you take away from this presentation, this is the one. Standard operating procedures. We need a place for our organizational knowledge. We need it to be simple, but we need to capture it. We're going to come back to this. Roles, tasks, tenure and tracking. These are your kind of, for your spreadsheet people. If you want to have your roles and spell out everything underneath. Some people like spreadsheets or places to, you know, hold stuff and have information. But it's really about understanding who we are and what we need and what's happening. Number 4 in the toolkit is the 5A method of volunteer recruitment. And I know I'm biased here because it's my model, but the model works. Taking a kind of a planned and targeted approach to recruitment is always preferable and always brings a bigger return on investment for your time, energy, and effort, in my opinion. And when it comes to succession planning, it is even more important to get super targeted and really, really planned in your approach. And number 5 is my meeting notes. Let's have a quick look at them. Super simple SOPs, super simple SOPs. If I was on a stage presenting, I'd dance to that, maybe sing, that wouldn't be good. Standard operating procedures. So you might not even know that you have a process for doing something, right? But it's usually there in your head. It's just not down on paper. And this comes back to that knowledge sharing, right? Our committees hold so much organizational knowledge. SOPs are great for succession planning because they keep that organizational knowledge safe. They open a space for automation. And I don't mean automation in terms of digital automation, but even automation for you in your brain. Once you've written down the steps to a process, you don't have to think about it anymore. You can just go automated. They provide backup for important tasks. So if someone is sick or someone has to go in a hurry, there's a record of how things are done. And they help us to teach and induct other people. So SOPs for all kinds of things, but here's just a couple of examples. Meeting procedures such as voting, writing of newsletters. What do we put in our newsletters? How do we publish them? Where are the passwords kept? Membership renewals can often be quite an intricate process depending on what system you're using. And also things as simple as Facebook posting. So how do we make them simple? So I have a super simple SOPs template, which is a Canva template. You probably can't click on that, but I will pop a link in the chat box, and Anna will circulate it as well. I've just put a couple of these into Canva templates, so you have them and you can edit them and move them around if you choose to use them. So the template is just about outlining what is the process, what is the description of the process, and then what are the steps we take to deliver on it? This is actually a 2-page template, so there's more over the other side. The other way of collecting organizational knowledge is by recording it. So Loom is my most favorite tool for this. And this little screenshot here, you can see that you can record your screen similar to you can with Zoom. You could do this on Zoom as well, actually. And you can make a short video recording yourself actually doing the task online. And so that's a great way to capture the organizational knowledge without necessarily having to sit there and type it all out. Trello is a program that's like a project management tool, essentially, that is free and awesome for housing your SOPs. And so this is a little screenshot. I know that's super small down there, but essentially Trello gives you a really visual way to represent processes. So you have these columns coming down, and for example, you might have one of those columns being your president's role, and then each of the little cards that sits underneath would be a task. And you can open up each of these cards, and in there you can store your template that outlines the process, and you can store your video that shows you, records you doing the process. And so I love Trello. It's a really great way to represent those standard operating procedures. All right, I'm going to fly through these. So roles, skills, and sharing. First, we're needing to understand the roles in our committee and the tasks that sit under each of them, and then know which of these can be delegated. We're looking to rotate skills and roles as often as possible and track tenure in roles so that we can track that rotation. You can catalogue skills, you can have leadership pipelines, but there's no need to get really technical. Simple is best when it comes to this stuff. Here's a couple of examples though. So up in the top left, I have a roles and responsibilities list. This is just made in PowerPoint, each of the roles, each of the areas and the tasks that sit under them. So having something like this, and Trello is actually awesome for this as well, but that your organization has this stuff captured, because once you know what the tasks are, then you can share the tasks out. This is an example of a tenure tracking table. So even if people are moving out of roles and into other roles, that you're just tracking their amount of time in certain roles. Something like a committee skills assessment template can be really useful for looking at, okay, if these skills are really important to us in the committee, who on our committee has them, who in our membership has them? And if it's no one, then that's a good indicator that that's the kind of skill that you're going to go out and do targeted recruitment for. And look, leadership pipelines, this is just about knowing your people, about knowing who is around and whether they're interested in stepping into roles. And if not, it's an indicator that you should be recruiting now, not later. So recruitment, I said it before, for me, this is all about being super targeted and a really planned approach rather than casting the net wide. Refine your vision down to exactly what it is you're trying to fill and get really proactive and really like have those one-on-one conversations. This is the method. You can access this. Anna has sent it around. So if you don't have that, just flick Anna a message. I'm sure she can send it to you, but it's also the entire volunteer recruitment presentation we did was based on this specific model. And it's just like a step-by-step approach. And finally, contribution and participation and the power of reflection. So making a regular practice of reflecting on our participation and our contribution to meetings helps to cultivate that self-awareness in our members around the amount of space that they take up. And it supports the courage it takes for some people to speak up in groups of people. In 20 years of facilitating groups and working with committees, I have seen nothing more transforming than this process when it comes to committee meetings. So this is just a page out of a committee handbook, and it's a My Meeting Notes. So this is by no means meant to replace minutes. This is for each individual within the meeting to utilize, and you can, put the meeting date in there. It gives you space to consider what is your personal goal or intention for the meeting. You can put meeting notes there, you can capture your action points, but cast your eyes on this, meeting reflections. How I feel about my participation, how I feel about my contribution, and what do I want to contribute next time? So participation being, I voted, I engaged in small talk, I spoke in the room. Contribution being about the value that I brought to the table, the experience that I shared, the ideas I got to get across. The process of doing this within committees is so incredible. It allows those dynamics to balance. It creates powerful spaces of collaboration. It helps to induct new members and create a bit of a level playing field with, you know, rank and power and roles and things. And so when we have really collaborative, positive dynamics in our meetings, I think that this is a really great foundational piece for succession. And because people don't want to get on and volunteer for things that are not, you know, fun and interesting and engaging. So Martin H. Fisher said, knowledge is a process of piling up facts. Wisdom lies in their simplification. So if I was going to distill all of this down to you, this whole hour, into 4 key points, they would be this. This is your take homes for your committees, for your groups. Capture and pass on that organizational knowledge. It is the first step. Have a systematic, targeted approach to recruitment. Put time into cultivating inclusive, collaborative, and welcoming spaces, and have those open conversations about what that looks like for you, because that will be different in every group. And those words are open to interpretation, right? So what's welcoming for me might not be welcoming for someone else. Equally manage the induction of new people coming in and the stepping down of our incredibly valuable volunteers over time. If we don't have these conversations until it's too late, people get burnt out. People get, you know, quite significantly damaged. Our brand gets damaged. Our reputation gets damaged. We want to help people through that process of stepping down and ensure that it can be, you know, as beautiful as the processes of bringing someone in. And that is it from me. So I'll provide these slides so you'll have all of this. My email's there. I'm totally happy for people to send questions. And some of the documents that I'll share with you are just pages out of a committee induction package that I have, which is just simplified for inductions. And as always, I always give discounts for when I run webinars, but it's like cheap, right? It's $50 for your whole committee forever. So yeah.